Langley. I was 4 when they came and got me. And it was the summer of 1959. And I was wearing a cotton nightie that my mom had made for me. And soldiers came into the house, and they were in Green Army fatigues. And they just came. Everybody else was asleep, and nobody woke up. Nobody. Normally, it would have woke my dad up in an instant, but nobody woke up. And they put me in the back of a Jeep, and we just drove for days. At night, not in the daytime. We kind of followed Route 66 backwards.
Mm-hmm.
I lived north of there, so we drove down State Route 99 to Route 66 and then east. And part of the time we drove in the daytime, but we were underground. And I don't know where we were, but it was tunnels that they were wide enough for 2 Jeeps to meet, but we never met anybody. And there were the old big bare light bulbs hanging from wires that were just draped.
Mm-hmm.
You would, if you were under one, you could just see the next one. And so it was basically to show you where the tunnel was, not to guide your way. And we would drive, it felt like forever. And we ended up in Virginia. And this was before the CIA headquarters were there. So I don't know which building I was kept in. I was kept in the basement. And somewhere along the line, I was mind wiped so that I wouldn't remember my family, wouldn't cry for my mother, you know. I still spoke English, but just barely. I mean, I was 4. I was very eloquent for a 4-year-old, but I was still a 4-year-old. And they started the mind fracture by holding me headfirst into a tub of water until I drowned. And I woke up inside the regeneration tank. And the regeneration tank has a green gel that you float in. So it's one of those areas where you have no stimulation. I can't. Yeah. And when I woke up, my head was shaved. So I had no hair, which was, my hair was stringy and tangled easily. And after all that travel and no brush, it was probably a mess anyway. So I wasn't worried about it. I don't know why I didn't remember my family, but I did remember the trip. Maybe it's different altered memories. But I had a number put on me here. There's no scar, but I think it was more of a stamp rather than a tattoo. But I was number 7. The agent who activated my memories had been number 5. That was part of why he appealed to me. Well, part of me remembered him. he remembered having been a number 5. That number meant something to him, but I don't think he remembered being at Langley. But they had this list of tortures that they put us through to mind fracture us. When an adult goes through these things, they just give up and die or go catatonic. When a small enough child is put through them, the child will choose to live by separating a piece of themselves as a bubble around that memory. So they're basically taking that memory and setting it aside. Like, that didn't happen. The goal was to form a 13 by 13 by 13 cubic array of those bubbles in a hierarchical sequence. So they only trained one to say, kill people with their mind, and all of the subalters would learn it from that one. This was standard operating procedure. So that when you add it up, it's just under 2,200 alters.
I'm sorry, is 2,200 alters, does it mean that you have had 2,200 trauma experiences? So every time there is a trauma, there is not new alter created?
That was their goal. I don't think they were that efficient. I think there were times that I was stubborn and they had to redo it.
Okay.
When it got to where you stopped responding to a specific torture, they would go to the next one on the list. They started with drowning because they wanted you to learn to breathe in the regeneration tank,
Mm-hmm.
which was a liquid. And later when I was home, I had trouble learning to swim because I would keep breathing the pool. Well, that's what they taught me to do at Langley. So I don't remember all of the tortures because I haven't accessed enough of those altars to know what all the tortures were. What I remember, I was drowned. I was raped repeatedly, sodomized, nailed inside a wall and left to suffocate, locked inside a vault with other children with no food or water. I was shot. I was also shot through the heart, not only by the staff, but by other children, because we were forced to kill each other. Part of what we were learning was that death was not an option. That you could be obviously dead and the next day or two you'd be back. And that has been true in the service, is you're dead, you're dumped into regeneration or put into a new clone body. So you may be dead today, but you're not tomorrow. There is no escape. You will always be part of them. Death is not permanent. You don't get to escape them. So The one about being nailed into the wall. I had nightmares about that for decades before the memory came back. And it was basically variations of a ugly little blonde child that a woman would open a cabinet door and the child would crawl in and crawl through the wall and just basically act like a squirrel in the wall. That was what the nightmare was. And when the memory finally came, it was they had a section of the wall that had been emptied of all of the insulation and wiring and everything. It was just an empty section that was a little bit bigger than most of us were. And they would shove us in it, put a piece of plywood over it, and screw it in. And just leave us there. So when I finally accepted that that's what the memory was, the nightmare stopped. But the memory of them is still very vivid. There was a neighbor child in the 1990s that looked so much like the little girl in the nightmares that I was having those on a regular basis. So the fact that I thought of her as an ugly child gives you some idea of my self-image at the time. So I was tiny and thin, and my head kept being shaved, and I was kept in hospital pajamas all the time, and I probably thought I was ugly. And I don't remember them telling me I was, but it wouldn't shock me if they had. But the people I worked with, hell of a way to put it, the people that were in charge of mind fracturing me were all Americans. I think one had a German accent. There were several ETs around. Most of them were Mansids or Greys.
That was at Langley, all of that, right?
That was at Langley. And I didn't see them often.
Mm-hmm.
I know there was once I was taken out of our area and down a hall where I could see into, might have been a typing pool. You know, the days before computers where they all had the typewriters.
Yep.
Because there were people in there typing and there were ETs standing with them, supervising. And I was taken down the hall to somewhere else. And that was where I met the one Naga lady who was in a white lab coat, just like it was normal. So with my memories of these people, their faces are completely missing. There was one Christmas party,
Mm-hmm.
and my feeling is that it was when the CIA headquarters was dedicated. And some of us were brought to that, and I was in an actual dress. Still had a bald head. And there was a Christmas tree in the corner. And my memories, everybody stops at the hips.
Mm-hmm.
I can see skirts and stockings high heels. I can see slacks and dress shoes. Everything above that, they're invisible. So that's obviously my memory was erased by some means. Um, I didn't think they had the technology then, but they probably did when I was sent back to
Hmm.
be able to fine tune it like that.
Okay. How do
Uh,
you know this was Langley base per se? How did you find it out?
when I think about it, it's like the word Langley is scribbled across it.
Okay.
I don't know how else to explain it.
Hmm.
It's the memory says it's Langley.
Okay.
So they may have told me. I don't know.
Hmm.
But
So this has to have been a very sectioned off area. I assume. I mean, it should
yeah,
have been some kind of a very separated, uh, isolated sector there, right, at the base, where
it
all
was.
of that reality was happening, while the rest of the base was probably just regular, personnel and stuff.
Mhm. It was underground.
Hmm.
I'm not sure how many levels underground. And it had the feel of a prison hospital.
So no windows. You never saw like sunlight or anything.
No,
Okay.
there were no windows. Everything was white.
Hmm.
The the walls were tiled up to about a meter high.
Hmm.
It was probably 3 feet, but it was about that range. And the tiles were white. The walls were white. The floors had white tiles. As much of the furniture as they could paint white was white. It was white. My personal room, room number 7, had a cot and a small toilet and a small sink and no mirror and one window in the door, and it was very small. So they could see me, not so I could see anything.
Okay.
And um, my pajamas were white, and the one blanket I had was white. And they would get really concerned if I sat and rocked because that was a sign of going catatonic. And they lost the kids that went catatonic. That was the mind was giving up. They wanted you to want to live,
Hmm.
but they wanted to break you.
Okay.
And 80% of my group went catatonic.
And how many
And
how many children were there that you remember?
hundreds,
Hundreds.
there were hundreds when I got there. Hundreds.
Did
And
you
80%.
see them all in like one place at a time sometimes?
We would occasionally be in a cafeteria space.
Okay.
We were not allowed to interact,
Uh-huh.
but we would be in the cafeteria together. And that's how I knew that Steve had been there, was
Okay.
because I had seen him in the cafeteria. And
But you were all separated in your own rooms. No one could come
yes,
out. So during the day you would have all this kind of stuff happen. And sometimes you would just sit there for the whole day. Yeah.
sometimes you'd be in the room for the whole day, for the whole week.
Okay.
And then they would come in the middle of the night and yank you out and do crap to you. and plop you back into the room if they hadn't killed you, or put you in a regen tank. And when you came out, they'd hose you off, put you in fresh PJs, and put you back in your room. Sometimes they would bring you food in your room. Sometimes they'd let you starve. And then other times, if they thought you'd been in solitary long enough, they'd pull you into the cafeteria with other kids that you weren't allowed to play with. You know, you weren't allowed to talk to. You had to just sit and eat, or whatever assignment they had for you.
Was there any like physical training involved? Any kind of training that you did?
Not at that point.
Okay.
At At that point, they were concentrating on mind fracture.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first year and a half.
So that's 1959 to 1960.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
By the end of
The end of
1960, I had
1960. Okay.
by the end of 1960, I had the required number of alters.
Mm-hmm.
1961, I went to Montauk for 6 months,
Mm-hmm.
and they kept me in a cage. And at the end of the 6 months, they brought me back to my same little room at Langley. And I was driven in a car between those places.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew it was Montauk, and at that point I knew it was Langley because I could read the signs.
Mm-hmm. Did you?
And
Okay. No.
because Mom had taught me to read and write when I was 4. So they may have erased Mom, but they didn't erase the read and write. So I may have been the only one of the kids that could read and write. I don't know.
Were there older kids? I mean, you were 4, 5, 6 years old. Were there kids that were like in their preteens or something?
The group of us were between 4 and 8 when we got there.
Mm-hmm.
We were all little. Whoever had done the preliminary research knew that it required little kids,
Sure.
that the older kids would die. And they were hoping more of us would live, but 80% of us died the first year. That's outrageous waste.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know why the Department of Defense tolerated it. I don't know why the CIA tolerated it, losing that many of us. But my understanding from other veterans of these programs is that by 1980 that they had stopped doing the extreme mind fracture,
Mm-hmm.
that they were only doing like 30 alters each.
The people
Oh,
around you, the employees there, was there a lot of, would you say, like qualified personnel who knew like doctors? I presume those were like psychiatrists with special skills, right? Who were doing this. First of all, where do you think this whole technique come from? Did it all come from the Germany, or was it? Do you think it was there before? Did they know about this before? How did they know how to mind fracture, the technique and everything?
I don't know from my memories.
Okay.
I have done research, and there was a lot of research in the 1800s.
Mm.
Americans, English, Germans, French, and Russians, Austrians. There was almost a Cold War about this type of agent. And a lot of research was done and then buried so that In the 1960s, we see the KGB and the CIA and MI5 all doing the same research again. So I think the level that I was at, they were building on the old research.
Uh-huh.
So I think the publicly known MK Ultra was repeating the old research. And this time using drugs that were not available in the 1800s.
That's right. The LSD and stuff.
Yeah, LSD was a new drug.
So the people around you, what was their demeanor like? Were they like just cold, soulless to you, or was there any interaction? Were they like sadistic, or how did they communicate all of this?
The people in charge were sadistic.
Mhm.
They enjoyed what they did to us. The day-to-day people that were carrying out their orders were cold and clinical, like this was just another day's work.
They probably
There,
might have been mind fractured themselves to do this.
it's possible.
Yeah.
It's possible. Especially the ones doing it today. They're probably mind fractured. But the ones then, it's like there was no mercy. There was no defense. I know my abilities were weaponized by them attacking me, because that's what happened when I came back from Montauk, was my abilities were weaponized. And then I was taught the skills that they wanted my alters to have.
Okay.
I was taught how to destroy electronics with my mind. I was taught how to kill people with my mind. I was taught how to kill people with weapons. I was taught how to be a female assassin without getting caught. And part of that is the ninja invisibility. You put up a field from your own chi that makes it where people don't even see you. I have memories of an assassin alter who walks out of a hotel room stark naked, covered in her victim's blood, and no one even sees her. They look right through her like she's not there. I have no idea how she pulls this off, but I've seen her do it more than once.
Okay.
That's once the first altar was activated. I've had others almost like dominoes. The ones that were close to it they start by, I wake up in that altar with it active and watch what it does with the inability to affect what it does.
Okay. Is that a memory or is it in real time, usually?
It's in real time.
No, I mean, is it from the past or?
No, I have altars still active.
Okay. Okay, we should probably talk about it more in detail, because a lot of people still don't understand how you can be somewhere with your altar and physically being here. Okay. All right. So you remember the training, the battle training, the weapons training, the psychic psionic training as well. Martial arts as well, everything.
Martial arts, magic.
Oh.
We were taught magic by Bavarian Illuminati. We had training from Knights Templar. We had We had Japanese ninjas come teach us.
Really?
And it was a very complex training.
Can you
And
do you remember anything like most clearly that you can describe? Any part of it?
we would be set against each other
Mm-hmm.
where we had to have shielding to protect from each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, the orders were only one of us was coming out of the room alive. And there might be 5 of us in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And it was no holds barred, use whatever you got. Only one of you is coming out alive. We were forced into killing each other. And there were no alliances. You did what you had to do,
Mm-hmm.
and you survived, and you got out. Or you didn't. And you ended up in the regeneration tank, and however long it took to recover from the injuries, you'd be in there, and then it would be back to the same thing because you didn't pass.
Mm-hmm.
And
So they would do it until you passed.
maybe they
Yeah.
might make you pass 5 or 6 times,
Right.
or 30. And there was no rhyme or reason to it. You might
Mm-hmm.
be in the middle of another training, and they'll pull you out for a couple of days for something else.
Mm-hmm.
There was no structure. There was no continuity. It
Mm-hmm.
was constant chaos. We
Right.
were never allowed to be on solid footing. We were always at their whim. As in, we were not people who mattered. We were assets. We were tools. We were owned, and death was not an option. They kept reinforcing the idea that they owned us and they could do whatever the hell they wanted to us. And there was nothing we were allowed to do. Now, one of the skills that I had was the ability to blow people's heads up or stop their hearts. And I practiced this on the idiots that were running the program. That was when they found out I could do it, was because I did it to them. And they were not happy coming out of the regen tank. They weren't happy about coming out of the regen tank at all, because you come out with full memory of what happened before you went in.
So you remember
People,
how you were killed, right? When you come out.
yeah, you remember how you were killed, and you remember what it felt like,
Oh, okay.
and who did it. And so the anger levels get really high. And we were not allowed to be angry, except at some point you figured out that the anger would power the psionics weapons. You could channel that anger into the ability and use it against the person you were angry with.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like a major breakthrough, to learn to channel that energy. And they gave the impression they were angry with me,
Okay.
but they may or may not have been. They lied a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know how to put it other than that. They lied a lot. They would tell you, oh, if you do this, then we'll let you have that. And then you'd never get it. And there was no affection. There was no respect. There was no, all the things that little kids need. I mean, you're a dad. You know what little kids need. We didn't get any of that. So we were not loved. We were tortured. We were not kept warm. We were not given any of the things that children normally need. After my abuse with the program and my abuse with my parents, when I had kids of my own, I would sit there in a situation and think, what would my mother do? And then do the exact opposite. That was the way I raised my kids, was the opposite of how I had been raised. And they grew up and they're all three married and they're all three self-supporting and none of them are in jail and they're good people. So the opposite of what I was raised like turned out to be the best plan. So my experience at Langley was not something I would wish on my worst enemy. That's the honest truth. And if they are still doing anything of the sort to anyone, it should be stopped.
Do you think they still are?
I've had people from other factions tell me it's been stopped, that it was considered a waste of prime assets because so many of us died. And I would agree with that assessment. But in the SSP group, I have too many young people in their 20s coming to me with similar memories for me to believe that it stopped. And these are not just Americans. These are from all over the world. A significant number of them, English is a second language for them. So these are not just English-speaking people. These are from everywhere. The biggest commonality is that they have Merovingian in their family tree.
So Europeans mostly, right? Europeans or anywhere, I guess.
Merovingians were 1,500 years ago. Those people got around a lot.
Yep.
So they could be anywhere. Anywhere that Europeans ever went, which is everywhere on the planet. So
so the ETs there then, the mantids and the greys, were you ever in the same setting with them? And what do you remember? What was their role there? What did they do?
I never saw them outside the offices area.
Okay.
They were not involved in the day-to-day work.
But you did see them in the building somewhere. Okay.
I saw them on the same floor of the building. The only times I was ever out of that floor were when I was taken to Montauk and brought back. And then when we left to go to New York, there's a jump gate on Long Island, and we were taken there. That's how we got to Mars.
And the Naga being, was she, you said that she was like a scientist basically with them. Do you know what she did specifically there? No.
I have no idea what she did specifically there, but she told me telepathically that it would eventually be okay. So whatever that means. A lot of ETs tell humans things like that just to calm you down.
Right.
Because we have an emotional energy that is kind of explosive, especially when it hits a being that's not fully 3D. The bloodline that they were choosing was one that is Nordic hybrid, and we naturally have more psionic abilities than normals. And so when they added the Draco on top of that, and then the teaching us how to use it and weaponizing it, we became dangerous to the ETs in the building.
Yeah.
So I'm sure most of her kindness was self-protection.
Sure. How tall was she?
The upright part was almost 6 foot, and she had a good 20-foot tail behind her.
Oh, okay. So it was a
It
snake.
was
It was a
a large,
snake, basically snake spine that ended up with a tail. Okay. And a torso with like arms and legs and stuff. Okay.
just arms,
Oh, just arms.
just arms,
So no legs then.
no
Oh,
legs.
okay, I see.
Slithering along. Yes, I inhabit a world where snakes and lizards can talk. Sometimes
Yeah.
with their mouths, sometimes with telepathy. There are also mantids who are 8, 9 foot tall, talking bugs, and the grays that are anywhere from 3 feet tall to 6 feet tall, and they're mostly telepathic. And this is the world I inhabit. This is normal. I understand it's not for everyone else.
Were there any reptilians on the base that you remember? Apart from, I mean, besides the Naga person.
Not at Langley. There was the one.
Montauk, yeah.
There was the one at Montauk, but not at Langley. The people involved with the mind fracture and weaponization were all human. And I've had lots and lots and lots and lots of people balk at that. They want to think it's reptilians, but it's not. It's humans.
Or Germans, for that matter.
Or,
or Germans, right?
I didn't see any Germans. There was one man who had a German accent. I don't know what their personal ethnicity was, but they spoke English. So
this gives you like an idea of there being like a group of people who are trained and aware and had a project set up by that time, 1960, the end of 1950s, and they were perfectly fine with that. And outside you had your normal day America.
Yes, and there were people probably in the same building, several stories up, who had no clue this was going on at all.
Amazing.
They were going about their normal lives.
So was there
coming in, jogging around,
sure,
weapons practice, filling out paperwork, whatever they did.
Was there any
normal Air Force base stuff?
Right, so that's an Air Force base with pilots and everything.
It's an Air Force base, yes.
Oh, okay.
And somewhere on the property, there's a building that the basement had this. I don't know if it's even still in the same building, because that was 60 years ago.
Way back. Was there any final exam that you took that you remember? Like, what was it at the end of this program, just before you jumped to Mars? What happened?
They told us our time was up. Apparently they had a new group coming in.
Okay.
And I remember hearing the thoughts of the guy in charge. He had gotten chewed out for losing so many of us. I had been there 5 years when they sent me to Mars. So I was 9 when I went through the jump gate.
How many of you
And I was
gave at once?
At that one trip, there were, I think, 8 or 9 of us in the elevator that turned into the jump room. But that doesn't mean there were more before and after.
Sure.
So we went into this building and we were still in our pajamas. And we went into the elevator and they said, okay, that's enough. And they had one operator that ran the panel. And there was a panel for regular elevator and there was a slide. And there was a panel for the jump gate.
So you mean it was actually in a regular elevator, not in a secret like enclosure?
Yeah, it was in an actual elevator in a building on Long Island in New York.
And you know that building, right?
It's not the Empire State Building.
Okay, all right.
But it was big enough to have an elevator in 1964.
Okay.
And it was right on the river and under a bridge. The only photo that I've seen from that time period, it was a hospital, which would explain why nobody cared that we were in Pedro. And we were told to huddle in the middle and not touch the edges, not touch the walls. Because the walls kind of morphed into a time tunnel look.
Sure.
And it went through the back and it took about 20 minutes and we were in Langley on Mars.
As you went, could you see what was going on around you, like the hyperspace, whatever? Was it like
it looked more like the tunnel, from
okay.
Montauk. The tunnel from Montauk where it had the lubies. It looked more like that. So it was a variation of that technology.
And you couldn't tell where basically the elevator cabin ended and how, like the when it morphed into this tunnel, you couldn't like see when it was physical and then it wasn't, right? It was like all in one.
Yeah, it just sort of, you know, if they had us in the middle,
right,
all together. I mean, you know, kids, 8 or 9 little kids huddled together, and the youngest ones are like 9, and we're supposed to touch each other. Come on. After we've been killing each other in training, come on, get real. This ain't happening. So we were in the middle, but it wasn't until the walls appeared to dissolve that we actually hung on to each other. And that was more self-protection.
Yeah. So 20 minutes of this, right?
20 minutes of this, yes. And then we were at Ali's Polimo.